Welcome to this podcast on digital responsibility. There's a vibrant community across the world at the moment driving forward corporate digital responsibility, which includes a range of aspects from digital ethics, digital for the environment, sustainability, digital well-being, inclusion, accessibility, and more. My name is Rob Price, one of the founders of Corporate Digital Responsibility back in 2017. If you'd like to know more, have a look at the website corporatedigitalresponsibility.net. So, welcome to episode 10 of the Corporate Digital Responsibility podcast. And this week it's all about financial inclusion and more. So, delighted to welcome my guests this week, Kevin and Karen. Karen, would you like to start with a quick introduction?
Yeah, Karen Elliott. I'm a senior lecturer in Fintech at Newcastle University Business School. I co-lead two projects, one called FinTrust, which I'll talk about a bit later, a second one called FinInclusion, looking at verifiable credentials. And I'm a slightly different academic. I come from an industry background and then moved into academia, and I'm very interested in trust and finance.
Excellent, thank you. And I believe once upon a time you also introduced me to Kevin. So Kevin, over to you, quick intro.
Hiya, Kevin Telford. I'm the Global Economic Observatory Lead at GOFCoE, the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence, which we created a couple of years ago. My background is mainly in corporate startups, investments, and looking at the intersection of society, environment, and economic models of the future.
That's great, Kevin. And I should also add, we're also joined by Christopher, fellow co-founder of Corporate Digital Responsibility. Karen, it must be a year ago that we kind of started talking about CDR and found some strong synergies with the work that you were doing as well. Would you like to kind of give a bit of background to that, and especially recognising how it's evolved for you over the last kind of few years?
Yeah, it's evolved significantly. So I've been in the financial fintech sector for about 6-7 years now, when I was first at Durham University before moving to Newcastle 5 years ago. My interest was sparked around trust from a social science perspective when I was working on a paper looking at the possibilities of blockchain and cryptocurrencies and what this could mean for transacting, but how would we be able to trust transactions on the blockchain, which in theory are trustless. And then that sparked my interest. And when I moved to Newcastle, I approached my colleagues in the School of Computing because there was a call out looking at trust, privacy, security, and identity. And we worked together looking at the concepts of trust from a human perspective and how can we translate that into a technical perspective, because from a technical perspective it's been a lot about acceptance of testing and making sure that the machine learning systems, AI, do what they're expected to do, meet certain criteria, and that's okay. But we move beyond that to sort of really unpack, how do you produce trustworthy data? So far, the last couple of years, well, almost 3 years, we've looked at prototypes producing a chain of trust. So we've got a paper about that. And then on the social side, we also looked at a social license to operate. So in essence, it's okay to have trustworthy technology, but how about citizens and their rights to understand and have access and be aware of all the products on offer to have a benefit, so towards an equitable digital society, which is a big banner that Kevin and I are going to unpack. So Kevin and I met about 3 years ago through an interest in open banking, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more, and that feeds into our project, because we're looking at how can we open up fintech more to the broader population and make sure that the underpinning machine learning processes are unbiased. So for instance, people who ordinarily can't get access to financial services, is it the machine learning aspect that has been trained on biased historic data that is impacting on their digital well-being? And this has also led into a recent project that's funded by the Gates Foundation, looking at vulnerable consumers. And we're just at the outset of that, producing a prototype, working with the likes of the credit unions, Citizens Advice Bureau, responsible lenders that are lending to the groups of people who are sort of on the periphery of the normal bank's remit of a customer. And, what does vulnerability look like for them? Do they see themselves as vulnerable? How do we give them voice to understand their journey and build a prototype around verifying who they are? Because they're probably wanting to lend amounts that are significantly below, say, £2,000, but we've also got to be responsible in the way that we lend to them. So we're currently working on that project and working with the community. This has also brought me in contact with people like Joe Zammit from Radix think tank, who's looking at, since we've left the EU, what does this mean for the interaction of social, industrial competition, financial laws, etc., across the EU, because as we know, the UK is #1 in fintech. So my interests come under the banner of fintech, but it's going across how do we get collaboration, how do we look at vulnerability of consumers, and leads me towards focusing on value from making technology trustworthy, unbiased as possible, with the caveat that there's always a bias there because it's created by humans for humans to use. And then how can we produce an ethical toolkit, which is one of the outcomes of this project, Fintrust project, that'll be open to all providers to use to wrap around their algorithms and draw out the bias as much as possible. And I say for the Finclusion project, we're producing a prototype that we hope will get more funding for. And this also lends into a concept or two we're looking at, which is fairness as a service, where we can actually test your algorithms to see how fair they are, how transparent they are, and how biased they are. So we can actually identify it for you and help you unpack that. So there's lots of things going on over the last 2 or 3 years. I just see it like burgeoning and more areas emerging. And I was actually fortunate enough to feature in the Khalifa report that was published this week. And also I work within the National Fintrust Network. So that's Fintech Scotland, Fintech North, and Innovate Finance in London. I've worked with them on masterclasses for educating students at school level age of why they should care about their data and who has it. So that brings me to another interest, which is ethical AI, which links nice to the concept of corporate digital responsibility. Because if we have a social license to operate, how would we get corporates to buy into this? Because we've got corporate social responsibility. So I think in discussions with you, Rob, and Christopher, and other people who are starting to write around this area, which is limited, we're looking at CDR as like a subset of CSR, but that we can bring in this concept of a new digital responsibility and move towards what I always focus on, which is an equitable digital society for all. And this is where I've been working with Kevin on open banking and GOFCoE's objectives.
I'm reminded as you were talking, I mean, one of the things that we did a few years ago now was to do this survey around how people felt about digital technologies in the context of adoption. And the two areas that shone through were people adopted things because it was convenient to do so. It saved them time. It was a clear kind of benefit, and because there was health benefit or actual well-being benefit. So it's almost a financial well-being test, isn't it? And your point around open banking, I mean, I was always fascinated to kind of understand what the consumer proposition was for open banking. I get it from the point of view of opening up, but how do you give those benefits to a consumer who may feel, well, as you said, kind of they may or may not know that they're on the periphery and in terms of access and gaining benefit from those things. Kevin, a number of times Karen introduced you. So do you want to kind of introduce GOFCoE and maybe some of the interactions?
Yes, I think I'll start with the interest in CDR. I see it very much synergistic with what we're doing at GOFCoE. I see it as an umbrella around data, the intersection of digital that brings in data, technology, and ways of working. And I'll talk a little bit about that. My journey on this particular path started about 10 years ago when I got involved in GDPR, and I had a shining moment that I realized that the ability now, the track that we're on towards citizens' data rights and digital level playing field, ethics, inclusivity, all around that, and bringing those two together would be really important as we went through a journey of shaping out open banking, open finance, and ultimately open life. where legislation and citizens' data rights live alongside digital data rights, whereby we become the owners of our data and the controllers of that data. I was fairly ambitious and thought, well, that'll take 5 years, and still 10 years on, we're still starting to shape that. So GOFCoE is still in startup mode. So I'll answer this in the context of GOFCoE as we are today, but also the wider context of what's happening in seismic shifts that's making this happen. So GOFCoE's vision is pretty straightforward. Our vision is to improve lives, economy, environment, and society. Our purpose is to inspire, empower people to create impactful research and innovation initiatives through harnessing financial, digital data assets to make smarter decisions. Our mission is really driven around people to collaborate, educate on digital enablement through technology, data intelligence, with people that's working on ethical operating standards for impactful delivery on some of the greatest economic, environmental, societal problems that we face. Big ambition. And it's a forever ambition. It's about creating, first of all, we went to get funding for GOFCoE. We raised the package through Strengthened Places funding with 22.5 million against a strategy and a plan that we put together with Edinburgh University and FData and Fintech Scotland. And we put a package of 55 million to seed fund it together. So what is GOFCoE? Well, GOFCoE is 3 core capability areas. It's about building the global economic observatory that has a space to collaborate around deep exploration of economic, societal, and environmental data sets that allows us to create that longitudinal study of how people spend, save, and earn in that context. On top of the GEO, it has an innovation playground where organizations can stand up challenges around the data and look at AI, ML, test the bias, but also start innovation cohorts and challenges where they get access to data. And the third part of that is the technical and ethical standards that go alongside having trust of getting other organizations. So the premise is that we created an environment. We sit in a £180 million data environment called a data safe haven in Edinburgh. On top of that, governance is ethics, privacy, and compliance principles for the academics to get access to tools to do research that will inform innovation. So in a nutshell, GEO is a series of projects around organizations, big, small, different, being able to share data with trusted entities such as GOFCoE, and then bring that into collaboration. I think Christopher wants to interject at this point.
Not interject, Kevin, as much as kind of tease you a bit, because that goal and purpose that you just described is wonderful, and I love the fact that you've put people very much at the heart of that change, because I sense that sometimes when we talk about data and get into the nitty-gritty of accessibility, etc., we can get into a very technology conversation, and yet it's supporting and enabling those that most need our support in society, those that you referenced earlier, Karen, as people who might be vulnerable in a financial sense and in other senses too. That's a really important goal that I think CDR suggests is going to become more and more important for organizations. I was just wondering, in your experience with engaging organizations and sharing this message of a new positive way of supporting the end user, the person with this technology and this change, how have organizations perceived that? Have they been on board? Have they been resistant? Has it been a positive conversation with them?
I've probably over the time with the team engaged about 70 organizations, from large really banks right the way through to small fintech startups, support groups, cut across government, which government are great supporters of this initiative. And without a shadow of a doubt, every organization wants to come on the purpose. That there's not one that doesn't. The difficulty is in making that information governance, that ability to unlock data across organizations. That's very difficult. It took us some time to get our first contract in place with a major bank to be able to share pseudonymized data for us to then use for exactly what you just described around social impact on COVID and the economy, and how can we help small to medium enterprises in their recovery. So it's very much always based around doing the right thing by the individual. So it starts with that premise that, as you said, CDR is central to that, and starting with a clear purpose. So in recent months, now that we're standing up projects and case studies, the desire to get involved in this is getting stronger every day. Organizations want to do the right thing against their B Corp model or their ESG or their CSR type of policy, and the individuals inside the organizations all want to come on this journey, but it's a difficult thing to do, Rob.
I think the thing that I am seeing, and maybe it's driven through the consequence of the pandemic, if you like, is this kind of stronger sense of community, stronger sense of desire to do things, a new digital responsibility, if you like, that spans not only corporates but individuals and governments and academia, etc. But it isn't a shift that can happen overnight. So it comes back to the combination of many initiatives like those that we're talking about here. Karen, you mentioned the Radix report that was published a couple of months ago, asking the question of fintech delivering true social value. So I think the thing that I'd ask both of you really is building on those conversations. Where are the things that you'd perhaps highlight as some of the really interesting consequences, the things that some of those fintech organizations, or indeed kind of big corporate organizations, are doing differently to engage parts of society that haven't been as engaged before, to provide a greater difference to those parts of society that have maybe missed out before? Anything that you'd highlight?
I think it's actually emerging as we speak, because I was talking earlier today, like I say, with credit unions about how they could collaborate, and one of them was actually using a fintech provider, using open banking to actually credit check these more, what you would term perhaps vulnerable customers. So that's the real change that I've seen, that the technology is actually helping, where the person actually described that the process they used had been paper-based, and through the automation, like gradually using the technology to actually drive being able to get out into community, add this onto social media, where technology is working for the people. Because I think that's at the center of Kevin and I's interest. When we met, for instance, we were supposed to only meet for half an hour, and a couple of hours later we were still talking about the centrality of people in this process, and how technology was sometimes seen as the panacea. But I have to agree with some writing around, it's a technology fallacy, that it starts with the people and you have to take them with you by raising this awareness. But I definitely see that there's movements to collaborate more. When I was sitting on some academic panels, because I come from an industry background, I was saying to people, it's great going towards a cashless society, but we need to stop and have that caveat of, we need to take everybody with us and raise awareness so that technology can actually benefit all. And if you're looking for specific examples, it is perhaps a digitization of the former credit unions or community banks that are starting to come on board, and they're liaising with the likes of the challenger banks, such as Atom, who we work with here in the Northeast. And it's raising this awareness that more traditional banks are now having to be pressurized by the fintech movement to actually consider and broaden their options. Whereas I remember sitting down at Durham University and having this conversation with leaders in the area where it wasn't even an option. They weren't considering it. It was sort of, this is a traditional perspective, where now that's being tipped on its head. And in even the Ferrari around the potential of blockchain to do good, to record transactions, to help track and trace people's verifiable credentials as moving forward. But concrete examples are just starting to emerge as people are starting to collaborate more. And as you say, I think on the back of COVID, this is actually helping, because people are seeing that we are interdependent species and we need collaboration to move forward. And there's a great new book just come out, sort of saying the way forward in the economy is mutualism. built up from the ground up rather than top down. And I like that, that terminology, that we have to have this mutual respect and collaboration to make sure we are moving towards that digital society with responsibility, that the ethical side of AI doesn't just talk about, oh, this is what we should do, but we actually find ways of bringing it into the technology that we can do it. And it doesn't just become a washing exercise, as we've seen in so many other ethical domains.
Cool. And Kevin, one of the things that I think we've kind of touched on a number of times has been whether some of these things are going to happen naturally because organisations want to do these. There is value in doing it, or whether it's also dependent on policy and regulation to enforce change or drive change faster, accelerate it. Where are you in what you've seen, and obviously in the context of the GOFCoE conversations? Do you see enough appetite for change, or what do you think would help?
I think it's a combination. I think for many people, humanity is going to drive us from a tech era into a purpose-driven era where we have no choice around the environment but to act, where we can't sit by and watch society fall into poverty for certain parts. I think there's many seismic shifts happening out there that creates problems for some people and opportunity for others. But I also see that this polarized society that we've maybe experienced for some time is starting to think, right, COVID is now saying we need to work some stuff out, but there's also the legislation seismic shifts coming around data rights around the world now. We also see in society not accept inequalities. You're seeing disability balance up, we're seeing leveling up, we're seeing the VC market move into more sustainable projects and start to measure them. So I think there's this shift towards purpose, and I think if I had to describe it, I would describe it as 5 Ps. And as Karen said, from the new bottom-up approach, and I think the new bottom-up approach is social capital, where organizations measurably flow investment back into some of these big tangential issues that we face. And to enable that, it starts with putting the money down to drive the innovation, and the innovation will follow. So the 5 Ps is the penultimate bottom line is now profit. And on top of that profit, you've got purpose, and you've got people and planet, but most important, you've got progress. We see, yourselves, corporate digital responsibility, starting to say responsibility for digital. It's corporate, academia, government, and when you break that down, it's the tech, the data, the digital enablers, all of that. So I think that the seismic shifts that are happening are empowering the change, and where there's change, there's opportunity.
Well, I was just reflecting. I love the idea of a purpose-driven economy, but I also think that a lot of technology organizations don't have much choice to play, but to play a participative role in our society now and how it operates. We've got CEOs that sometimes seem more like politicians or activists that are pushing for change and positivity. Sometimes in spite of regulation, and we find regulation catching up, and I'm sure open banking is a fantastic example of that in its own right. But I think that creates a real paradigm shift for organizations going forward as to what role they want to play in that world, and how they're going to equate that purpose to how they characterize success for them. Yes, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how they pick that up.
Yes, and I think that to be a purpose-driven organization, that has benefits to the bottom line, attracting the right talent, retaining them, creating new models. So some of the organizations that we're seeing are now saying we've got a 5 trillion deficit in pensions in later life. I don't know the exact number, but we might be working until we're 88. We've got 500 victims of fraud every year. We've got almost 2 million people unemployed, 9% of the community. Poor people can pay, on average, £490 a year for the privilege of being poor, and the poverty premium. So we're seeing organisations not accept that. In the UK, 14.2 million people are in poverty, including 4.5 million children. So it's the right thing to do, but it's also the things that people want to do. And so we're seeing organisations start to collaborate around taking responsibility for digital in the way that they design, and also using data-driven innovation to start and think, well, we need to tackle this 5 trillion pension deficit. How can we do it? We know what the problem statement is. Let's put digital responsibility at the front of the design and start to think, well, what data points do we need? And using research to spot where the gaps are, that we can start and face into some big issues, but start today. So we're seeing many organisations cross-sector, but that needs enablement. It needs the data to flow. It needs the data to be able to flow from one organisation to another with consent. And identity for that is critical. But also is the categorisation of the data and how organisations can use it. And most important, how do we protect the citizen in the heart of that, both from a trustworthy point of view and ethical point of view, that they have given permission for that data to be used for that purpose. So I think there's lots of things that's happening, and there's many organisations that I could call out now that are really pushing it forward, and many of them are working on the poverty premium right now. And I think that would attract me to work for an organisation and be part of those projects and initiatives. And I think collaborate. Okay.
No, I was going to say, I think you're spot on with one of the key drivers for change and the accelerator for change, which is people's desire to work for organisations that are going to make a difference. And I think more and more, if we kind of see the challenges around attraction and retention of talent to do the things that the organisations, whoever they may be, wherever they may be, if people just can't get access to people to deliver in the way that they have in the past, then maybe that will be the thing that forces that recognition of faster change. And I think for me, the things that you've described, both of you have described, are brilliant to see happening. But it's the concern, if you like, that I've got is are they happening fast enough? Do we get? Maybe that's the final question that I've got. What's the one thing that you would hope somebody listening to this podcast listens to, is inspired and thinks, I must do this differently? One sentence, kind of what would that be for each of you? Anyone want to start?
I would say we need to collaborate around the purpose motive and push forward together. We can't do this disjointedly. It has to be a collaborative effort.
Kevin?
Take steps towards the vision and the purpose and do it today. Use agile mindsets and take responsibility for digital and social and things that we've talked about, and just get on and stand stuff up.
And Christopher?
For me, it all revolves around that vulnerability into society, which affects us all in multiple ways. So what does that mean for you? How does it affect you in your life? And what should we collectively, in collaboration, seek to do about it? And that will give us a drive to change.
Wise words to end on, I think.